Accurate, diverse stories in the media are critically important. SRC Partners is a full-service cultural production firm. From development to market, we provide expertise on diversity and inclusivity. You will reach a much wider audience when they feel heard.
Welcome to the Non-Obvious Beyond Diversity Summit. I am the host and founder, Rohit Bhargava, and I'm so excited to be bringing you this panel on social impact in the age of diversity. And before we get to our amazing panelists and I introduce the moderator, I'd just like to read a short acknowledgement, a land acknowledgement. And before we begin, I'd like to take a moment and reflect upon the history of the indigenous lands we call home. While we're meeting today on a virtual platform, all of us occupy spaces that carry the powerful legacy of these diverse peoples and their unique local cultures. Through this acknowledgement, we reaffirm a deep commitment to improving our understanding of America's shared heritage and recognize our collective responsibility to improve the bonds between all nations. We're grateful for the opportunity to meet you wherever you may be on your journey toward a more diverse and inclusive society so that we can do the work together. I'm now very, very excited to introduce you to Juhu Thukral, our moderator today, social rights lawyer and an amazing personality. We've had a little bit of a chance to chat, and I think you are going to be leading a fantastic conversation. So I'd like to hand directly over to you so we can get right into it.
All right, wonderful. Hello, everyone, and thank you for that, Rohit. I want to thank actually the whole Non-Obvious team, Rohit, Lindsay Cox, Chubby, and also Sandhya Jane Patel at SRC Partners, who invited us into this conversation. And yes, we are here to talk about social impact and diversity. I want to introduce our panelists. We have three amazing panelists, and then I'm going to do just a touch of stage setting to really, set a context for ourselves. And then we're going to go into a conversation. So first, we have India Thusi. India is a law professor. She is an advocate on racial justice, gender, and media representation. Then we have Song. Song Kim is a human rights lawyer. She is an entrepreneur, and she is a co-host of the podcast Effing Ethical, which everyone should subscribe to. I subscribe and listen to all the episodes, and I'm always awaiting the next one. And then we have Yenny Solheim. Yenny is a tech and social impact innovator, and she is also a mentor to women and girls on private sector and corporate concerns. Hello and welcome. So in terms of where we are on social impact and diversity, I mean, this is such a timely conversation. We are in this serious and upsetting, but I hope also optimistic time in our country. We've had the January 6th insurrection and attempted coup. We have had this most recent impeachment. And then we're also at the dawn of a new administration, which I hope will be a time for us to really forge ahead with new agendas. We're coming out of 2020, where really diversity was just this topic amongst everyone, whether it was media, government, private sector, corporate players. And really it was because we sort of had on the national stage these police state killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many other Black Americans. And then, of course, that all happened within the context of the pandemic, where COVID had both, and continues to have, both public health impacts and economic impacts. So we're still figuring out what our institutions mean when they think about and talk about and act on diversity, social impact, and these kinds of ideas. So our panel today, we have these social impact superstars, and they are going to talk to us about ways that we can really create concrete, doable, and enduring change. So I'm going to start first with an opening question. I actually want all three of you to answer it. We'll go in the order of India, Song, and Yenny. And the question really is, first, just introduce yourselves a little bit more, anything that you think folks should know about you. And then I'd really like to get a sense from each of you, from your vantage point, from where you sit, What does social impact mean to you, and what's burning on your mind today, right now, on these issues? So India, I'm going to throw it to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm India Thusi. I'm an associate professor of law at Delaware Law School, where I teach criminal law, criminal procedure, and critical race theory. I'm also a legal fellow at the Opportunity Agenda. And when I think about social impact, I think about it as improving the well-being of a community. And so in improving the well-being for a community, I think it means confronting and addressing past injustices. It also means promoting a vision of the world where everyone can flourish and where you can embrace an inclusive and meaningful diversity. So that's what I think about social impact. So it's both about redressing past harms, but also looking to the future.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And how about you, Song? What are you thinking about?
Sure. So just a little bit more about me. As Juhu mentioned, I'm a former practicer of the law, and I used to work at an Asian American civil rights organization representing survivors of forced labor and working at the intersection of immigrants' rights and workers' rights. And recently, I took sort of a pivot into the business world. I went to business school 2 years ago because I felt like, as powerful as the law and policies were, in order to create a more sort of a sustainable and resilient kind of impact, I needed to understand the forces of capitalism a little bit better. And so currently I am sitting as the COO, and I co-founded a company called CovaDX, and we're building an AI-based diagnostic tool for sickle cell disease. And I think, my kind of, from where I sit right now and the way that I've been thinking about social impact from sort of my sphere, where I currently am, is, and I apologize, this is going to sound a little bit, startup-y, and sometimes, this kind of language makes me cringe, but really kind of hacking the forces of capitalism, the kind of unjust systems as they are right now, to really reallocate some of that capital to issues and communities that have been historically excluded for a more kind of equitable and just world.
Thanks. That's terrific. And then Yenny, what are your thoughts here?
So to introduce myself, I'm Yenny Solheim. I'm the Director of Social Impact at Niantic. We're a company that makes augmented reality technology, specifically focusing on encouraging people to explore the world around them with each other. Our most popular game is Pokemon Go, which a lot of people can relate to, but really our core focus is engaging with one another in the communities in which we live. And a lot of our work is tied to figuring out how we can use our technology to make real positive impact in local communities in the way that's most useful to them. The way that I think about social impact now is really digging deep and figuring out how social impact ties to your own personal mission and then your organization's mission. So really thinking about, who are we partnering with? How are we encouraging people to do one thing or the other? And really reframing the discussion around things like equal rights to become a constant long-term discussion that is always at the top of our minds.
Seeing some themes emerge here as y'all are speaking around these notions of diversity and how they relate actually to belonging and to community and a sense of justice and equity, and also to these ideas of how we're actually using technology. And I love the way you say the forces of capitalism, really breaking those down and seeing how we can use them as a force for good and where do we need to rein them in. The next question I'm gonna have India, I'll have you take the lead on. I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts on race, gender, and class, and these other dynamics and realities that we have that are playing out in the current context, and how you think they're having an impact when it comes to representation in our larger culture.
Yeah, these past 12 months or somewhere around 12 months have been challenging, But it's also been a lot harder to deny just how widespread and pervasive racial inequality and racism is. We're in a moment where there are a lot of contradictions. So we're seeing, as you stated earlier on, Juhu, these really visceral and overt displays of white supremacy in this country and insurrectionists as they're, raiding our capital and waving the flag of the Confederacy. But we're also seeing something else in this moment, right? And you spoke to, the potential hope that we were hoping for. And, we've been witnessing the incredible power of women from traditionally marginalized groups and the power of organizing. So, we have Black women organizers like Stacey Abrams getting more attention in the media, and LaTosha Brown in the South, and demonstrating the ways that coming together as a community can help protect the right to vote, or even Latina organizers mobilizing in the Southwest, right? We're about to have our first Asian and first Black woman as vice president in just a few days. So I think there's a greater awareness of, the power, and, there's a greater awareness of just the concept of intersectionality, which is a framework about, helping us think about how distinct forms of discrimination come together and intersect. So there's more representation of marginalized women and their collective work in the media. But we also have this narrative around white supremacy, and it can be hard to reconcile these conflicting stories that we're seeing. But I think this presents an opportunity. We may be at a moment where we can actually mobilize people and energize people because of these contradictions. The dramatic displays of white supremacy are unfortunate, but now I think people have been shocked out of complacency. There's acknowledgement that institutions play a role in perpetuating racial injustice, and many institutions have been openly engaging and reflecting about this. I think around 90 out of the 100 Fortune 100 companies have made a statement about or around racial justice or racism following George Floyd's death. 5 Black women law deans created a law deans anti-racism clearinghouse, which provides resources for implementing anti-racism. But I think the real challenge right now in this moment is that, while there's this recognition and there might be this opportunity where people are, trying to really address these issues because we're being confronted with them, it also requires actually putting resources behind our intentions and putting resources behind actually making these statements and these statements about diversity and being anti-racism, about being anti-racist into effect, right? So really embracing an ethic and work environment that's inclusive means that I think schools, corporations, government offices really need to re-examine their hiring practices, the ways they're promoting people. I think there needs to be an examination around mentoring, right? Because the initial research about, what the impact of this past year is, it hasn't been great, especially for those who are facing intersectional barriers, right? It shows that women workers have lost jobs, and all of the losses have been with Black women and Latina women, right? And so corporations need to really, I think, step up. And all institutions really need to step up and think about, what are the challenges people are facing, whether it's the crisis in care, needing additional sick leave, and just bringing bridging the gap between different institutions. That way, diverse people are able to thrive despite the different barriers they encounter. So, I guess just to close, I think, I'm hoping that in this moment, even despite all the despair and the challenges that we've been encountering, that, government and business and civil society, academic actors can remain energized, take this energy and this, kind of disgust with some of the stuff that we've been seeing, and actually move toward embodying values around diversity and real inclusiveness and putting resources behind it.
I think that's great. I mean, part of what I'm hearing is, again, this resonance around community belonging and then putting resources into it. As you know, we've seen a lot of corporate and even government actors engaging and starting that process. And so, Yenny, I want to bring you into this conversation and just see what you have to say that builds on that, especially the idea of resources and corporate players. And again, this notion of community that I think is really deeply embedded in your work.
Yeah, I think India hit it on the head, honestly. I've been, excited, hopeful to see that there are many, many organizations who have, in fact, made statements. That being said, saying something is different than doing something. And I think the organizations that choose to put action behind their words, behind their black squares, are really the ones that we should follow. India mentioned ensuring that we're hiring and retaining and promoting people of color. That's a huge one right there, huge. In the tech world, we've seen a lot of major problems around that. And I think there's significant change, positive change that can happen if every company takes a look at that and really looks at the overall issue as a long-term commitment to equality, not something that's going to last 3, 6, 9 months. Or even a year. This is systematic racism that's been happening for hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. So we need to look at it as an ongoing commitment. And that's something at Niantic that we've done. We have a whole task force team that's continuing to act on both internal and external commitments kind of across the diversity sphere. And we have a really amazing team that's working to lead all of that. So yeah, I would say that it's incredibly important for organizations to own up to their participation in, what's been going on in our world, and really just roll up their sleeves and take some action. All of us are a part of our own communities, so we all hold a responsibility to make it better.
That's great. And just Song, part of what Yenny was saying about this role of companies, it really resonated for me. And I was curious from your point of view as somebody who's been, a human rights lawyer who's represented people in very, very vulnerable positions and who's moved into the tech sector and into the private sector, what that looks like for you around representation, race, and gender, and, where we're headed in the larger culture.
And I so appreciate and I so appreciate, Yenny and India and all of their comments, and all of that resonates just like so hard with me. And it's so refreshing being in sort of this space again after, being in kind of like the startup and tech world that I've been immersed in for the past few months. And it's, I think, as was mentioned, kind of the recruiting piece and, diverse hiring and putting, making sure that there are pipelines for leadership for, people of color and women and people with disabilities and whatnot is super, super important. But I think it's one thing to make a commitment to change numbers, and it's another thing for there to be culture change, right? And I think the good news about sort of like this tech world that's recreating and sort of reimagining the way systems will work going into the future is that it's not as old, right? It's not as old as all of the other kind of systems, perhaps. It is, it's built on this idea of fail early and often and innovate and iterate. And I think that can go for culture as well. And I think it's so needed. So an example of just, kind of things that I've been thinking about as I'm thinking about, kind of building my own company and as I'm talking to other entrepreneurs and people in the VC space and whatnot, is, so I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but so back in October, there were kind of waves made in the tech space in not a great way, because the CEO of Coinbase, which is a cryptocurrency exchange, essentially made this statement that talk around politics was no longer welcome in the workplace, and that anyone who disagreed, he invited to leave, right? To leave the company. He offered a very, kind of generous severance package. And this was in reaction to an employee walkout in response to the company's position on Black Lives Matter. And so employees walked out and the CEO said, okay, our workplace is no place for, we have a, goal that we're aiming towards. We're going to build this like inclusive financial future for the world, and we don't have time for politics here. And so yeah, and he invited employees to leave if they wanted. And if that's the kind of culture that is building the new systems of the future, we have a problem, right? And so I think that being intentional and being thoughtful about culture from the get-go, from the beginning, is so important, because that is where the world is going, right? It's the tech giants that are building the new infrastructure of the future, and I think that it is really important to ensure that that culture is something that's cultivated sort of intentionally from the beginning.
That's terrific. And so, Yenny, I want to go to you with a question about this role, really, of the corporate sector and private players. You know, you and I have actually talked before about the idea of there's the profit-making enterprise and there's a social good purpose, and where they meet and where they can be in conflict. I would love for you to just elaborate more on that from your perspective.
Yeah, so I'll start first with how Niantic came to be. We're in a very unique position in that our actual products and technology has positive impact, in that folks have to go outside in order to move around and engage with the games. When they go outside, they explore their communities, they interact with art, they exercise, they may meet other people in, pre and post COVID times. And so really what comes out of that is all of this outpouring of letters and emails and social posts that we get from folks saying, hey, this made a big impact in my life. And so for us, the social good is inherently a part of our DNA. And so I see my team's role as amplifying that good that's already there. We have a lot of really amazing teams kind of across the company that work on features that encourage that good. When you look at other companies who are doing really amazing things, it might be harder for some organizations to kind of connect the dots there. But I think every single organization, whether they're for-profit or not, can think about what their interactions with the world are, and then consider how they tie in social good and social impact. Everything from cloud computation resources to B2B sales. There are so many different intersections to ensure that you're as inclusive and diverse and welcoming as possible. And I think if you bring all of that together, every single organization can really start to tie and thread a story through their organization that really gives them purpose beyond the dollars earned.
Right, that's so helpful. India, from where you are, you're in both academia and in the very active world of advocacy and race and gender, and you are teaching future lawyers and leaders. What kinds of resources and just sort of paths forward do you think are most helpful from the private sector?
So, there are a number of things. I think really supporting the people who work in these companies or who are interested in working in those companies. So I think Yenny mentioned the importance of creating pipelines for leadership. So I think that's important. Making sure that there is deliberate efforts at mentoring for everyone, I think is really important. I think also, providing responses that are institutional in nature for institutional problems. So instead of looking at an individual person's problem with care as being something that's just about that individual, realizing that we have a general institutional crisis with care in this country, maybe there are other ways that the company can think about bridging the gap, partnering perhaps with government agencies or even other private companies to ensure that their workers are fully supported, right? Because it's not just about hiring people. In order to really retain them and create a culture where people feel they can be themselves and feel included, then addressing all these different kind of barriers and challenges that they face, I think are really important, and putting resources behind those challenges, I think is important as well. So it could be providing resources around care. It could be the mentoring that I had mentioned. It could be training programs. It could be reaching to, for example, if you're a tech company that really struggles with diversity, maybe going to different HBCUs and actively recruiting might be a way to address some of those problems, right? So making it a priority, but not just in the statements that you're making, but in the actions that you're taking, and the resources you're willing to put and the money you're willing to put toward actualizing those goals.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like part of what I hear you saying is really building it into the business plan. And Song, this actually is a great segue into the next question that I had, and I really wanted to hear from you about just what you think around public-private partnerships, ones like the one India mentioned around care, family care, and what works, what doesn't, good idea or not, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's such a big question, and public-private partnerships, I think, evokes all kinds of feels, and there's no real kind of definition. There's no set standard definition for it, and I think for the purposes of this conversation, I think the broadest sense, how can the private sector and the public sector sort of pool their resources in a way that to bring about something that they wouldn't have been able to do on their own. I think with something like the vaccine, even, right? I think that we've seen just how much can be done when incentives are aligned, and kind of the government and the private sector and researchers and experts and regulators, when everybody gets on board towards a single cause with aligned incentives, just how much can be done. I feel like there's a lot of work to be done around like equitable rollout and logistics and all of that, but I truly feel like it's a small miracle that that we're able to be at this place right now with the vaccine, which is a very big kind of a public-private partnership. I think there are very kind of negative associations that we also have, such as the privatization of prisons, or tech companies providing facial recognition software to law enforcement, and kind of fueling racist policing. And I think that in those instances where things go so horribly wrong, it's the incentives are just misaligned, right? So companies, the private sector is looking for profits to get things out as quickly as possible without the kind of oversight. Whereas government, the incentives are around, or they should be around, right? Accountability and due process rights and whatnot. And the market does not currently provide those incentives. And so, I mean, as with anything, I think that it can be good or it can be bad. It just has to be done super, super thoughtfully. And I'm really excited because I feel like, because these conversations around this kind of like public and private partnerships are happening more and more, there are ways, such as kind of like new models of wealth building, right, in traditionally underinvested communities, like community equity investments, right, where communities can have buy-in to development projects that are happening in their communities and in their neighborhoods for, just a few $100s, right? Without being an accredited investor. Like, these are kind of new and really creative ways of building wealth in traditionally underinvested communities. And I feel like there's a real place for the government to be involved, whether it's through through financial literacy trainings, or by providing tax incentives to make vehicles like this much more kind of accessible and friendly to folks.
I think that's so well said, and I really like this focus that you've kind of pinpointed us on around aligning incentives. And so, Yenny, I would ask you, I mean, I think that just, with your work that does focus on these notions of public space and, private citizens, what you think about this question of incentives and aligning them in the context of your work and what you're seeing, the trends that you're seeing.
Yeah, so when we look at incentives in terms of engaging our players, which are literally community members all over the world, we really want to kind of walk the thin line of ensuring that players are having fun, but also maybe learning something that's useful or doing something that's helpful. So, for example, we might go to a small hyperlocal community in Houston and ask the players there, what is it that you notice when you walk around and play our games? What is it that you all need or want to maintain and support the community that you live in? And so really digging deep and listening to community members, whether they're players or not, and then applying some ideas to those things that people say that they want. And that's in contrast to, I think, what a lot of well-intentioned companies try to do, which is have one solution that they've come up with in their offices made up of folks that look alike, and then apply it kind of across a huge range of communities and assume that it will solve all problems, when really, there are so many unique communities. And so I think tying those incentives to what's actually useful and desired in a community is key.
That's terrific. And my last question actually really sort of takes us into our actionable next steps piece of this conversation. I mean, I think it's very important to the non-obvious team as they pulled this diversity summit together that we really leave our audience with actionable, concrete items. So I think that I really want to have us focus now on this question of what are some kinds of immediate next steps that y'all see as important to getting us to where we need to go. Again, I'm hearing a lot of themes from this rich conversation around community, belonging, resources, alignment of incentives, and the power of women who are organizing, especially women from marginalized communities. So I will actually, I will have you start, India, but I do want to hear from all three of you. I think India might be muted.
There you go. So in terms of actionable steps, I think, depending on the institution that you're in or organization that you're in, it may really begin with self-reflection about, past harms, right? And so for some organizations, they need to actually confront the fact that, perhaps they've fallen short in the past, and, being able to admit that and think about ways that they need to address those past harms. And then also looking internally around the culture that you're creating within your organization, right? Is it one that truly embraces the values that it says that it's about, right? What sort of programs do you have to support people within the organization? What sort of mentoring do you provide? What sort of pipeline programs do you have? And then also, going to some of what Yanni was saying, looking externally, right? So even having a cultural impact within your organization, creating an environment where people are supported, but also looking externally about the type of change you want to see in the community, right? And so actually working with communities and seeing ways that you're able to provide a positive social impact. So that might be, perhaps looking into partnerships with the government. It could just be reducing the harms that you're creating within the community that you're in, right? But thinking about things in terms of being both internal culturally and then also external, the type of culture that you want to promote within society in general.
Great, thanks. Is there anything that you think of as a concrete takeaway song that you want to really emphasize here? And then we'll go to Yenny, and then I would actually love to just have the three of y'all ask each other any questions, because you do sit in different vantage points. But Song, just anything around concrete and like immediate next steps.
Yeah, sure. So I think that, it kind of from this like private world and thinking about how corporate leaders can make a difference. I think something that's really urgent is for corporate leaders to kind of not just sign on to the idea, but really commit to a recognition that the primary responsibility of corporations isn't to create value for shareholders, right, anymore. It's really to create value for stakeholders, and it's always been that way, right? Whether it's employees, whether it's part-time workers, whether it's gig workers, whether it's your contractors, whether it's your customers, it's, whether it's people all across your supply chain, and what it means to really get their buy-in and to build a company and a product and whatever it is, that is for their benefit, right? And because the way things are currently, and while you're only thinking about shareholders, it's a very short-term and narrow view that causes destruction and inequality and doesn't build a more equitable and sustainable and resilient economy. So that's just like one thing that's sort of been on my mind about something I think that's kind of important and urgent in the big, urgent in sort of like the big term. And something else that I've been thinking about is the kind of investment management industry. So, yesterday I read this number that white male asset managers control 98.7% of the investment industry's almost $70 trillion in assets under management. So $70 trillion just to put into context, the federal government spent $6.5 trillion in fiscal year 2020. So you can imagine that these private dollars are actually what is keeping things going, that's rebuilding this world for broken healthcare systems, for environmental degradation, for mass incarceration, the affordable housing crisis. And I think it's really important to ensure that Black and Indigenous and other people of color are getting into kind of the money manager roles and platforms that's directing how our world is built. And that, I think that requires a whole new way of doing due diligence if you're an investor, and not kind of looking at the traditional frameworks that perpetuate white male dominance, but looking at other metrics such as their like, for example, like investing sourcement capabilities, or their domain expertise, or whether it requires like contextualizing their fees, or considering other risks that weren't traditionally considered when doing this sort of due diligence. So
Great.
Those are things that have been on my mind.
I think that's terrific. And, just using that term that you did, that really was evocative for me, the idea of a resilient economy. I think it just speaks again for this potential for abundance and an economy that works for all of us, as opposed to, I think, these notions around scarcity and fear that people almost automatically go into. Yenny, is there anything around these kinds of concrete takeaways that you want to talk about? And then it looks like we've got a few minutes for y'all to ask each other some questions, which I think would be great.
Yeah, I love the takeaways from India and Song. I think something that we've learned and that I've learned personally is educate yourself. Take the time to consistently and regularly educate yourself on what's going on and what your role is in all of this. And then take what you've learned and do a regular audit, both in your personal life and across your organization. So that can be everything from where do I get my groceries from, to who do I invest with, to what do my friends look like? And then at a company level, really asking, each other, are we being inclusive? What are we doing to ensure that we are supporting the people that work at our company, the people that work at our partner companies, and the users and consumers of whatever it is that you do? I think this kind of audit should really be done every 6 months or so, to hold yourself accountable for the ways in which your small actions might be adding up to something that you didn't intend. And something that I've been doing that's been really helpful is just identifying one thing every single day that I can do that brings me closer to a goal of being more inclusive and ensuring that I'm investing my time, my energy, my money into organizations and individuals that represent the whole of the world versus, a 1% group that kind of runs everything.
Great. That's terrific. All right. So a few minutes here. Do y'all have any questions that you'd like to ask each other?
So I've really enjoyed this conversation a lot, and I think there's some really interesting things that we all can collectively do when we look at the combination of for-profit, nonprofit, governmental, foundation. There's lots of other things that kind of fall into that. And I've been seeing a lot of people bringing together alliances that are made up of individuals that represent different organizations, similar to this group right here. And what I love about it is that there are so many different perspectives that come into play that you wouldn't necessarily see, that I certainly wouldn't see in tech, for example. And my question to both India and Song is what you think about that, and whether you think that's a good use of time, or if there are other ways for different types of people to share ideas.
Well, I guess I'll just jump in. I think it's an excellent use of time, and I've learned so much just hearing from you and from Song today. Like, I didn't realize that white men controlled $70 trillion of private money. I knew it was a lot, but I just learning about different industries, I think is helpful. And I think we've all brought different perspectives on this issue. And I think if we want to have sustainable kind of inclusion and it's sustainable diversity, we need these types of perspectives, right? We need that perspective that can draw from different disciplines and different perspectives. I think that's really important for any sort of culture change. And I think some of the most effective culture change is when actors from different industries and from different types of organizations come together around a particular issue. And I guess another example of that, I think a lot of the attention around like mass incarceration, for example, there have been some of those partnerships that have happened in certain spaces. And I think part of why there's at least an awareness that is an issue is because different stakeholders who don't ordinarily get together got together. So I think it's really important.
I think so.
There we go. And I completely agree. And, when I was back in sort of the social impact world, and I was very immersed in, working with like nonprofits and, working with corporates, but for, donations and not necessarily to actually like kind of roll up our sleeves together to come up with like a collective creative solution to these like really significant problems that our world is facing. There were real limitations of that. And, everybody has blind spots, and that's not a bad thing, right? We all have blind spots so that we can really, kind of hone our expertise in certain aspects. And then the beauty of humanity is that we have this like collective knowledge that we get to share. And so I so appreciate, this space where I got to learn from India and from Yenny and from you, Juhu. And I really appreciate the conveners out there who, there are, I guess, avenues for people to come together around certain issues. So I worked with an organization last summer in the Bay Area, and what they do is they bring together, philanthropists and impact investors and community members and local leaders to kind of come together around an issue to build trust among those members, because there will definitely be power dynamics, right? There will always be power dynamics, tough things to kind of work through interpersonally before the real work of healing and solutions creation can really happen. And so I think that there needs to be absolutely more of that. And I hope that with this new kind of virtual world that we're in, that will, hopefully it'll have helped and not kind of hindered efforts to bring folks together.
Yeah, no, I think this was all so great. And I think that we are really just at the end of our time, and you all have been amazing and just already popped so many new ideas. I mean, I think in some ways, what you're talking about right now, building on that theme that we've kind of had going throughout this entire conversation of community, is like creating new communities that really do build across different sectors and different skill sets and different mindsets and different approaches to the world. The other things that I just want to really just highlight quickly are, again, the power of women from traditionally marginalized groups organizing resources and really putting resources for the long term towards all of this work. The idea of pipelines, mentoring, regular audits. We've also got this idea of a resilient economy and the notion of stakeholders rather than shareholders only. And of course, the idea of public-private partnerships, especially around child and family care and around vaccine, both development and distribution. So I'm just going to end there with, what I've sort of been hearing today and just close us out. So I want to say again, a quick thank you to the Non-Obvious Diversity Summit team, to Rohit, Lindsay, and Chavi for putting this all together, the SRC Partners team, especially Sandhya Jane Patel, for inviting us into this conversation and producing this panel. And then, of course, thank you to our three amazing panelists, India, Yenny, and Song. You have been wonderful. And so also for our audience, you can check out a bunch of other sessions. Go to the Non-Obvious website and YouTube channel. And there is just a lot of conversation going on there. Thanks.